Hey guys, I'm Roman. I'm a machine learning researcher, and today we're going to be talking about context rot and how it's silently decreasing the accuracy of your models without you even knowing about it. So, avoiding context rot is the foundation behind context engineering. Context rot is where increasing the context given to your model at large thresholds begins to rot its accuracy due to the confusion and distraction that it causes the models to experience. So let's look at a recent study where they basically had the models grab and reproduce one line from a multi-thousand line context window. As you can see, for some reason, Opus way underperforms the other two models on this benchmark. But across the board, you can see big declines, especially around the 16K mark. This first 16,000 tokens in this study shows upwards of a 25% fall off, which is absolutely insane. So clearly there's something going on with context rot that's causing way more hallucinations in your model and way less accuracy. Now here's the kicker. Coding agents typically spend most of their session between 50 and 250k tokens, if not done right. This means that off the bat, your model is already experiencing at least a 20% fall off from what their accuracy should be, if not 50%. So here's what happens with coding agents, and they're extra prone to context rot. In order to get up to speed with codebases, they have to ingest a very large amount of data in order to understand the project you're working on, the file structure, the specs, the documentation, and this can be many tokens, 50, 60,000 tokens right off the bat, with 20 plus thousand of them being irrelevant. If you've ever used Claude Code, I'm sure you've noticed sometimes it goes off and reads files that it shouldn't be reading. So here's what context rot looks like when you're actually working with a model. You see a gradual onset, which means you need to be tracking context without just seeing the model's performance, because since it's so gradual, the model will just get dumber and dumber, and you won't realize what's going on. Then, anything that's away from the training data of the model, where the model has to extrapolate or utilize its context in order to build that, such as nuanced ideas or creative expression, those immediately are kicked out of the builds. Another thing is that the models tend to get lazy. They tend to say that they will continue, and they ask if they want you to continue. So this obviously hurts human in the loop or other situations. So here's what happens with nuance. If you're building a UI, the model knows 1 through 8 in this situation. Very simple stuff. The model knows how to build them like a piece of cake. But what really gives your website life is that satisfying button press that you grabbed from a React repo, or the scroll position that you very meticulously thought out and designed in Figma. And you ask the model to do these things, but it specifically ignores the last two things if it's experiencing context rot, because those are the most difficult things. And here's what happens with the model. The model decides what's not built yet. I'm going to give you some future enhancements. While I was building this presentation, the model literally did this to me. And here's what happens with the model. The model decides what's not built yet. I'm going to give you some future enhancements. While I was building this presentation, the model literally did this to me while I was working on this. It decided not to build all of the things I requested, and at least it keeps track of them, but it doesn't always do that. So the models sometimes, depending on the model, are trained and conditioned to preserve tokens, or they're explicitly system prompted to preserve tokens. Here are the warning signs that context rot is beginning, and you can spot it. You get the "you are absolutely right" in Claude Code when things are going downhill and it's confused and it's repeating itself. You get consistent hallucinations. You get the model making up files, features that don't exist. yeah, it repeats questions, or it forgets your instructions, or it explicitly ignores your instructions. Now, obviously, these are signs of general hallucinations or confusion in models that can happen with or without context rot, but context rot accentuates all of these issues. Here's another example from a paper called Lost in the Middle, where you are giving the model 20 retrieved documents and measuring its accuracy. This is a very common practice in RAG, where the RAG system pulls 20 very similar documents to your query and will give them to the model in its context window. But here's what ends up happening, and this is actually shocking. The accuracy of the model's ability to just retrieve the answer which it has in its context decreases the more in the middle of the context window that the relevant position is. If the important information is in the middle of your prompt when you're prompting a model, sometimes it will literally perform worse than if you didn't give the model the information at all. Think about how crazy that is. You're going out of your way to provide relevant context to the model, and it's performing worse than if you didn't provide that context. You just asked it to answer and basically guess. And mind you, this is only from around 4,000 tokens, which is not very much. Here's the dictation problem. If you are someone like me that likes to dictate to your models, and it is much quicker to do so, a lot of times you insert filler words, you repeat yourself, you insert irrelevant information into your prompt, and the model gets confused and distracted by that. So one solution that I came up with that I like is getting a reprompter model to add a role, add XML tags, remove irrelevant information or repeated information, and remove filler words, and structure your prompt. I made this tool. You can access it in my school community. Highly suggest either getting this from my school community or building this. So subagents as isolation is one of the biggest solutions for context rot. Because if you're telling one model to do all of the work the model has done starts to pile up in its context window. So what you do is you delegate isolated tasks to isolated specialized subagents, which have a task that does not conflict with another task of another agent. And you do this by using an orchestrator model to spawn these agents. They can work in parallel, which not only makes your coding quicker and better, but it also prevents the context rot, because you're only starting it with around 1,000 tokens of context from your prompt. Now, to be fair, they do still search your repository, but if you keep that minimal and you keep it very specific of what they have to search, you can minimize context rot. So clean context is peak performance. Garbage in leads to garbage out is the main takeaway for context rot. Here's an example. If you are working with a model to build an app and the model introduces a bug into your, you will probably send 5 to 10 prompts, depending on the scale of the bug, trying to fix this bug with the model. And that increases the context given to the model with a lot of irrelevant context about the bug. So once you get a fix, now you're in a situation where you have to think about compacting or compression or some other way of clearing out all of the noise from the bug fix. But what you can do instead is simply double press escape, go back to the part of the conversation before the bug was introduced where you were about to prompt the model to ask about the bug, and then restore only the conversation and not the code. And then you can also mention that you fixed a hallucination that the model came up with. This gives you an opportunity to fix the bug and also not rot your context. And the model will act like nothing ever happened, because in its mind, nothing did ever. Here's what I want to say about RAG. If you don't know retrieval augmented generation, I'll probably be making a video on it soon, but you can look it up. It's very simple. The way that it works is that you take a large knowledge base or database that you want the model to fully understand. And instead of fine-tuning the model, you embed the data in a vectorized database, and you query what parts of the data are most similar to what you want at a given time. And then you take those most similar chunks from your database and you provide it to the model in its context window in real time. So obviously, this can cause context rot because it's very similar to the process seen in the Lost in the Middle paper. But if you do it right, this will allow your model to have domain awareness and not hallucinate as much. So back when 1 million context models were released, people were saying that the was the death of RAG, and that you could just shove your entire knowledge base into the context window of these new and improved models. But that's not the case, because mostly in your knowledge base there's going to be a bunch of noise, where RAG is the filter for that noise and allows you to get only relevant information. So it saves your model from context rot. And here's another reality of context awareness, and something that I have that's a hot take that I want to bring up. And it's the fact that most people are very frustrated and angry at the fact that Opus only has a 200,000 context. Now, what this actually means is that you can only go through a 5-minute or so conversation with Opus until its context window fills up, and you have to figure out a way to compact. Well, this is actually a very useful skill to learn, how to compact models, and it forces you to do this. Meanwhile, 1 million context length models will just allow you to get into bad habits and continue to stuff context into the model's window without worrying about compression or clearing or handoffs. So, one thing that I do in order to get better at context engineering and force myself to get good at it is I disable auto compact in whatever coding tool you're using. I use Claude Code, and in Claude Code I add a status line which basically tells me how much of the context I'm currently at all times and what model I'm also working with at all times. This just makes the whole process a lot better and a lot easier, and it allows me to choose what information goes into the model at what times, where compact basically blurs all of the information together. So here are my key takeaways. Always use subagents when you're working on isolated tasks. This will make things quicker, and you will be way less prone to text rot. You need to be wary of what your coding agent goes off and reads to start a session. Sometimes you might even have to ask the model to start fresh. Also, Model Context Protocol MCP servers will eat up your context, and your Claude.md file will eat up your context, which means that to start the session, even without searching, your model will start with 10,000 plus tokens of context, which we've proven will decrease its accuracy tremendously, especially on important reasoning tasks. You need to compact strategically, or hand off or clear strategically. You need to be in control of what the model is seeing in its context so that it does not get distracted and it does not get lazy. So I suggest don't use 1 million context models. I prefer that you use 200,000 context models, and you disable auto compact and you compact or isolate very intelligently and very strategically. We are not vibe coders. We are agent. So if you are going to use 1 million context models, use them wisely. I personally use Sonnet 1M as a press button in case of emergency. So for example, if I just finished building out an app and Opus at the exact time runs out of context or is starting to get context rotted, then what I can do is switch to Sonnet 1M and do little last debugs, and I can watch it closely and make sure that we're only doing the mission critical stuff. This just prevents me from having to compact or having to context engineer when it's just one quick little fix. Thank you so much. If you would like, join my school community where I release code and my thoughts. Also, if you have any ideas for what you would like to learn about agentic engineering, leave a comment and I will very likely video on that topic.